Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Indy Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Tallman, and with me today is my business partner, Scott Hallberg. Welcome back to the show, Scott.
Hello. Yeah, it's great to be back.
Yeah. So, Scott, brought you on here today. A couple of Sundays ago, I was at home, and for some reason, it came into my brain that I realized we were coming up on had to be getting close to our 25th anniversary of owning rental properties. So I just kind of did the math in my hand. And so that following Monday, I looked it up, and sure enough, we bought our very first rental property 25 years to the date. It was August 25th of 2000 is the date we bought that property. And I thought it'd be fun to bring you on here and review that investment 25 years later. An investment I want to make clear, we still own it. So I thought it'd be fun to bring you on here and review that investment 25 years later. And, it's been a lot of things happen in that investment over the 25 years. And I want to make clear, we still own that property. We bought it 25 years, still own it. And at the very end of the podcast, I want to, I don't know what your grade is. You don't know what my grade is, but I want to grade that property from A to F on how we think that investment has turned out. So first question, Scott, how do you feel after owning a rental, or the thought of owning a rental property 25 years? How does that make you feel?
Some ways it's hard to believe. I don't think that when we first bought it, I thought we would hold it this long initially, but the time has flown by. I mean, I have a few gray hairs, of course. So thinking back and that it's been 25 years makes me feel old. But at the same time, it seems like it went by in a blink of an eye.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know what I thought when we first bought this property, like how long we'd own it. I think we all, I think like the investor's dream is that you buy a property and you pay it off, right? And we're getting into that with a lot of our properties now. And so maybe I always envisioned we'd own these. I always envisioned us owning them long term. 25 years is a very long term. So yeah, I want to just kind of go over the stats real quick before we dive into this property a bit. It's a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, 926 square feet property that's close to our office. It was built in 1950, aluminum siding, super, super common home in this area of South Broad Ripple, and an area that we both lived in for a while and decided that's where we wanted to invest. And I know we talked about this some in our origin podcast. We did a couple of origin story podcasts, Scott, recently, and obviously you and I did those together. And we talked a little bit about this first property and kind of what we went through and what our mindset was, and to go into that. But what memories do you have of that, of buying this property, like all those, now more than 25 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where we had been talking about trying to get into real estate investing, and we started looking and targeting homes. But when we finally found this one, I was a little anxious about making the move. It wasn't, we didn't have any experience doing this, and so it was going to be our first foray into this. But at the end of the day, we knew the area and we felt comfortable with it. We had this motto where we'd buy a home that we would feel comfortable living in, and it met that, it checked that box. So when we found this and made the offer, I feel pretty comfortable with it. I remember that, but it was a new venture, and it was, there's a little bit of anxiety about, do we really know how to do this? And, we didn't know what would happen. And so, but we took the leap of faith, and remember that once we'd made the purchase, and we talked about this many times, is that it turned out to be smooth sailing, and it was actually so easy that it kind of convinced us to do more faster.
Yeah. No, I think I did. That's a good point. We talked about how when we had this thing under contract, the seller, it was an estate, allowed us to show the property, which is unusual and probably not recommended, but we're able to, advertise for it and show it while we had it under contract. And we even went so far as to sign a lease before we owned it, which is probably not a good idea because things can happen. We know that last minute, but we signed a lease and drove literally from the closing table to the property and moved the resident in. And I wholeheartedly agree. It was like, wow, this is pretty simple. It seems simple. And I think we initially planned to buy one a year, and that quickly changed because we went on and bought a property the next month, I think on Kingsley. And then it kind of went on and on and on. And we bought, up to 25 doors or so within a pretty quick time frame, a couple of years or so is what we amassed in that first couple of years. So Scott, let's get into some of these numbers. Some of these top level numbers, and we can get into some more details, but we paid $82,000 for the property back in 2000. It was considered to be move-in ready. I don't know. I'm curious if we sent our property managers in there today or our project managers, what they would say about the property as far as, is it really move-in ready? But we thought, hey, it's pretty clean. It just been painted and things worked. So we felt comfortable that it was move-in, and we went ahead and moved forward with it. And it's probably worth today around 225,000, I would guess. So, it's approximately tripled in value over 25 years. And that sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. We've made better purchases, but we're not going to get into that today. I want to talk about this one more specifically. So, Scott, you've kept the books on this property for a long time now, and you printed out a P&L on this specific property that we're talking about today. What stuck out to you the most? Like, as you're going through the P&L, all these different numbers, there's a lot of big numbers, numbers accumulate over 25 years, but what on the P&L stuck out to you the most?
It was kind of interesting to see the total rent collected over the 25 years. It actually exceeded the value of the property. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Significantly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the fact that maintenance wasn't as bad as I first thought it probably was. And one thing that we do is we do classify like routine maintenance, like upkeep and general repairs as repairs. And then we have another category called turnover, which is your make ready work and things that happen in between tenants.
Right.
Because that's not an ongoing regular occurrence. And, we can talk about how many tenants we've had later, but, you're not going to see a turnover. Hopefully you won't see a turnover every year. But you're going to have something go wrong, a door handle come off or a leaky toilet, and you're going to have to make regular repairs. And so when you consider all the different things like landscaping, repairs, and supplies, and all the things that go into that, it was roughly 9 or 10% of the collected income.
Yeah.
For a 1950s home, that's right on target. It's kind of what we tell owners to expect. Turnover was a whole nother thing. I mean, it's obvious that turnover is very expensive, and as a company, we do a lot to try to prevent that today. But back then, it was just you and I, and we just kind of ran it as we hoped it would work out. But at the end of the day, after 25 years, we spent another 14% on make ready work. So yeah, overall total, I guess, expenditures on making the property, getting it in good condition and making it safe and sound is about 25% of revenue, which is a little high, but when you break it down and you look at what happens during those periods, it seems reasonable. It's what we see a lot. For
a 1950s home, I mean, it's a 75-year-old property right now. So yeah, I think 25% sounds really good. You were talking percentages. I can talk numbers. We've collected close to $250,000 in rent, right, since we've owned the property. So you can do the math. We've had over $50,000 of just repairs, maintenance, turnover. I know a lot of people kind of lump that all together. I think it's smart to break it out, frankly, so you can kind of see your ongoing operational expenses in R&M, repairs and maintenance, versus what it costs you to turn the unit. So yeah, those are some interesting kind of top level numbers. Anything else on the P&L that stood out?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we did is during the turnovers, we've made selective upgrades over the years. We refinished our hardwoods and put some time into the kitchen, made it better, and things like that. So it wasn't. I mean, you probably could have done it cheaper,
Yeah.
but we chose to keep it as nice as possible. Yeah, overall, I think you look at the net. I mean, on paper we lost money, but that's not uncommon because of depreciation. And
Right.
so I actually look forward and appreciate that tax sheltering there,
Hmm.
making that depreciation entry each year, and that takes away a lot of income off the radar.
Yeah.
So that's been a good benefit for us. You add that back in, it was kind of marginally positive operational cash flow. So
Right.
it wasn't a cash flow king for us or anything like that.
No, I think, yeah, from a net operating income, it made just under $10,000. But if you take in our pay down, like what we paid in, because you don't take on your P&L, right? Your pay down is not an expense. You can expense the interest, but as far as cash flow, like you mentioned, it was a negative cash flow property for us. It's been a negative cash flow property over the course of 25 years. Because up until recently, and even maybe I know we owe just maybe a tiny bit on it. Is that right? Because we've allocated it a little differently, but
Yeah, we
uh,
refinanced it once, so it has drawn out a little bit, but there's just
yeah,
one more year left on it, basically.
yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting, maybe diversion here to take, because we bought this property, Scott, in our own names. Because back then, I just interviewed Josh Heinz with Lending One recently, and he's talking about all these new products where you can get a 30-year amortization on a commercial, like basically T&H Properties that owns this property could go to him and get a 30-year mortgage on this property. We couldn't do that back then,
No.
right? If you wanted to do a commercial loan, it was 25% down, maybe a 20-year AM if you got lucky. But for cash flow purposes, we bought this in our names, personal names, and then did a 30-year mortgage, right? And then you mentioned, and I don't remember the dates, you may not either, but several years later, we refinanced this into basically a blanket loan. Is that what we do? We put a bunch of properties together and consolidated it.
Right. Yeah, we definitely paid off individual loans and put like more of a, yeah, I think it was like 10 or so properties into one blanket loan.
Yeah, which is going to help accelerate the pay down a little bit. I mean, we're not quite to 30 years. We still got 5 years left on it, and it should pay down before the 30 for sure. But yeah, that's what we did. And like
Well,
you
yeah, the
mentioned,
refi was a 20-year AM, so it did cut it down to, closer to, I think it'd be like 26 years basically.
right, is what it goes down to. Yeah. All right. You talked about some of the strategic improvements. The house had some carpet. I remember that. And maybe in the bedrooms, and then I think like the dining room had it, like it was hardwood living room, and then the dining room was split. It had carpet in the dining
Yeah, it
room.
had a
And
transition strip in the middle, I think.
yeah, which was kind of
Um,
unusual.
right.
And once that carpet got to the place where it needed to be replaced, and this is something I think investors should consider, and I know we've done this a lot. We're actually doing it to another property we own right now, is if there are hardwood floors, refinish them, right? Because carpet is just, it's not good. It's not great stuff. It's dirty. It runs out. There's definitely a shelf life on carpet, and we've strategically went through a lot of our rentals and removed carpet and refinished hardwood floors, which I think makes a lot of sense to do.
Yeah, I think two things happen. I mean, I think one, yeah, the durability of carpet is, only at best 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
But we actually don't see that quite often in rental properties because it just gets abused, unfortunately. And so you're just burn that money, every so often you got to reload on it, and it does cost. And carpet's really increased over time. So as far as the cost, so it really has, and it can be expensive to keep that going. But yeah, I think the second thing is that the marketplace has really moved towards, hard floors, hard finishes, um,
Yeah.
for allergy reasons and just cosmetic taste or whatever. So yeah, upgrading to a hard surface, be it tile or LTV or if you have the hardwoods, obviously it'd be wise to try to use those because that preserves the historical character of the home, and I think that's always the preference if you have it.
Yeah. And I mean, the reality is most of the homes we bought were older. Like this is one of the newer ones, I think, 1950s. 1950 property. Um, we bought homes, further south in our city, which they're just older. Generally speaking, they're older, and we've had the opportunity just numerous times where we've pulled carpets, found hardwoods, refinished them, and they last indefinitely. And they last a very long time, much longer than carpet. So you pay more probably to refinish it, but you just don't have to replace it every few years, which is awesome.
I think in this property, yeah, I guess restored the hardwoods in the dining room and in the bedrooms. And now I think the whole main level is primarily hard surfaces. And I think there may be some carpet in the basement still. Like, I'm not 100% sure, but
Yeah, I think it's all concrete down there because it is an interesting point because when we bought this property, I think it was listed. I got the listing right here. I can look, but they listed as a 2-bedroom, 1.5 bath, which it really is because it has still kind of a pseudo finished basement, but it's concrete floors painted, but they had rooms down and it's like divided up into rooms and things like that. And I think at one point we wanted to use those like, hey, you can put a bedroom down here and things like that. But we've learned that's not a good idea. And I think it could be worth talking about just a minute is if you have rooms in a basement, you need to make sure you have egress windows down there for safety issues. You really can't call it a bedroom if you don't. Now, how your resident may choose to live in the property is one thing, but if you're a landlord out there and you have a broad rural property or just, around the city, there's a ton of examples of homes with basements. Basements are very common in Indiana. And you want to represent a room in a basement as a bedroom, you have to have an egress window. And if you don't, you're going to put yourself at a big liability for safety issues. Because if there's a fire in the middle of the night and someone's needs to get out of that property, they need a place to get out. And we've had to have that lesson with some of our clients, I believe, right? If like you can't call that a bedroom. I think it's been something we've had to do. Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So it's a 2-bedroom for us and it'll always be represented as a 2-bedroom, even though there are some rooms down there. So Scott, anything else you want to talk about with terms of maintenance? I know we've done some HVAC. I don't know how much detail you want to go into there, but I know there's maybe a story there with HVAC.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about CapEx, and when we first bought the property, it overall had okay mechanicals, except for the furnace was quite old, and we went ahead and put a new furnace in right away as the first expenditure we had after we purchased the property. So it's, outside of that, it's been pretty low. I mean, I'm sure we put a few water heaters in, but we don't really capitalize those or just expense them as they happen. But we just recently put a new complete HVAC system in. 25 years
Right.
later, we had it happened last month in August, almost to the date that we
Wow.
put a whole new system in. So we have brand new furnace and AC now, and I guess we're good for another 25 years.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Or maybe we shouldn't hope that we own this thing in 25 years. I don't know if
No, I
that'd be a
know.
good thing or a bad thing. But yeah, the house, I'm looking at the listing, it said it came with a furnace or AC that was just 3 years old. But like you mentioned, we replaced the furnace early on and then put a second furnace and a new AC in just recently. So the crazy thing though, Scott, is we've never replaced the roof.
Yeah, no, and I was just thinking about that. It's like the only other big hanging issue that's out there is the roof, and we know we're
Right.
probably at the end of its lifetime. So I think we probably
Absolutely.
will be looking at that. If we own it a few more years, probably going to have to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, because we've had homes where we've replaced the roof more than once. And there's one definitely example of a property out on 46th Street where we just put our second roof on the property and somehow this one's made it, and you drive by the property, the roof looks okay. It does, it's not new, you can tell, but it doesn't look like it's probably close to 30 years old now because it didn't mention in the listing that the roof was new. I don't think it was very old at all when we bought the home, but to go 25 years and not have to replace a roof, that's just kind of a neat story of itself. So
Yeah, and the only thing I could think of is that it's a lighter color roof. I think it's Shasta white.
it is.
So 3 tab, just your basic, you know, Owen Corning shingle. But at the end of the day, maybe some of the darker roofs just get more heat exposure and maybe those wear out faster.
Could
I don't
be
know.
because
Yeah.
the one we replaced, yes, it was the second time it was a darker. So, all right, you talked about tenant history a little bit ago. Before I get into all the details, any stories stick out to you about the residents we've had over there?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting, 25 years, early on, and as we mentioned earlier, we had the first resident meet us there today. We closed and moved in, and she was in there for quite a while. And then when she moved out, our second tenant was also in there for quite a while. So I think the first half of the ownership, we only had two residents that whole time.
That's right.
And that was pretty amazing, I thought, to think about that. Now, since then, the last 12 years or so, it's been a little faster um,
Yeah.
in and out. But I think overall, they averaged over 2 years each.
Yeah, I can get into that real quick. The person we met in the driveway and gave him the keys after closing was there a little over 4 years. Second resident was there over 7.5 years. So she was there. Yeah, right. Over 7 years she was there. I look back on her lease. I could not find our first lease on the property. I think we talked about it before we started recording here, is that it probably ended up in a bin somewhere and went to a shred pile, is what I'm guessing.
Yeah, this
But
is too old.
I did find the second resident we had in there, and it was a 4-page lease, which was
Oh, wow.
interesting. I think, we've morphed into over 20 pages now for our lease. Third and fourth tenants were a year and out. So again, we went over 12 years with two tenants, and it was third tenant was year and out, fourth tenant year and out. The fifth tenant was there 4.5 years, which is interesting. Sixth resident was there 3.5 years. Seventh, 1 year, 3 months, and then the eighth moved in July of 24, just renewed. So we know they'll be there at least 2. So our average is 3.4 years per resident, which I think is pretty good for a single family 2-bedroom, right? Because 2 bedrooms, you would think, I think the maybe conventional wisdom on that is that those are more 1 year and out type, because it could be roommates, young couples looking to upgrade to purchase a home. But the fact that we've averaged 3.4 years, now we've had some long-term ones in there, which really helps that average, is pretty good. So,
Yeah, for the
you said
area.
you,
Yeah, for the area too, because I mean that the South Broad Ripple area is really not like your traditional suburban area where you're going to have families with kids and school systems, and they're going to be
that's
in
right.
for a duration of 3 to 4 years because of a school system commitment. And so this is very, the area is known for its more vibrant nightlife, and it's sort of, geared towards a little bit younger population. But yeah, overall, we've had, very good luck there.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had mentioned a story before we jumped on here. One of our residents had a pretty interesting story. I don't know if you want to, how far you want to go into that, but I'll let you
Yeah, I
take it from
mean,
here.
we were thinking back, and most of our residents have been great, and I think that, we've had some good experiences. Although I think the second residence, I think is another interesting point, is the second resident, after being there for 7 years, we had to go through an eviction with her. So she had a life change that apparently sent things sideways, and it's just strange how that happens after 7 years, and normally that
Yeah.
doesn't happen.
Yeah. Wasn't a screening issue, I wouldn't think.
No.
Because since she'd have failed a little, and I don't even know how we screened people back then. I think we had some access to credit reports and things like that, but
Well, I think we used NTN, and then
yeah, we may have.
called,
That sounds right.
I'm sure we called landlord references, and
Yeah.
we did what at the time was standard, I think.
Was available. Yeah. The stuff we do today is like FBI investigation type
Right.
stuff compared to what we did back then. But
It's a lot more
yeah, I
stressful.
think it's an interesting lesson that, you think you got someone in and then they, after a year or two, they're performing. It doesn't mean they always will perform. I said this a ton of times. Life happens, things change. And I don't remember exactly. I think maybe it was a bad relationship she got into. I don't remember exactly, but her life changed and we ended up having to evict her, which is not a great thing for someone that's been there over 7 years. But that's how it ended.
Yeah, so
But
that was kind of our first like sour experience, I guess. But after, I mean, at that point, it had been 12 years. I mean, that's really an amazing track record.
Yeah.
Then we had a second resident more recently, a couple years ago, have a kind of adverse situation where she just went MIA. I mean, she just abandoned the lease and basically abandoned her life. It seemed like, I don't know if she was on the run from the FBI
Right.
or something. But she basically left all her possessions, including a cat, which was very frustrating and concerning. And, I think our office has, and you and I both are just extreme animal lovers, and we just hate when that happens. Fortunately, we had one of our employees step up and adopt the cat. So the cat ended up getting a
Right.
good home and is probably better off now and is still with our employee. So that was great. I appreciate her doing that. I actually helped out and tried to make sure the cat was healthy and in good shape for her. But anyways, but yeah, the most interesting thing is the resident just left all her belongings. We couldn't get a hold of her. So we had to basically kind of terminate the lease and go through like um, basically a removal process where we had to store her property, and after a certain period of time, we were able to liquidate that. But the most interesting thing is one of our other employees, in doing the move out inspection and checking the property for condition and whatnot, they found this bag and they opened it up, and there's just a ton of cash in this bag. It was kind of buried
Yeah.
in her dresser or something. And we were, I applaud our employee, our one of our maintenance guys, for his honesty. I mean, he notified us, and we called the police and had them come out and check into it. And at the end of the day, they're like, well, there's no sign of anything illicit going on. Just handle it like you normally would with her possessions. So we basically applied it to her account.
Mhm.
So we like, we tried to give it to the police officers, and they just didn't want to deal with it. And so we applied it to her account and cleaned out her possessions. And ultimately, with all the fees and everything that she owed us in rent, it actually satisfied her debts pretty much with us. And I
Right.
thought that was, I don't know if she planned this. I don't know exactly how that happened, or she forgot it was there. But at the end of the day, it was going to be a really huge loss for us, but it ended up being a net neutral kind of thing. We got a new
Wow.
tenant in there, and the rest is history. But yeah, I thought it was a
Yeah.
very odd situation and something we had never seen before. So
Yeah. That's unusual. I remember it. And yeah, just could write a book on all the tenant stories we've dealt with over the years. But another quick thing I kind of want to, I think our first rent on the property, again, I couldn't find the lease, but it was around $700 a month is what we collected. Today it's 1,275. So it hasn't doubled. I think that's probably a broader topic that I could spend 30 seconds on here, is that the property value has tripled. The rent has less than doubled. Now, this is very an isolated case, but I think it speaks to just kind of a greater issue going on, is that as home values have risen. Um, and we've seen just ebbs and flows with this property's value. It may not have went up at all in like 5 years, and then boom, you see a big jump, and then it slows down, then it jumps again. So, but it is, it's worth at least $225,000 today, and we're getting $1,275 in rent. So, and we paid $82,000 for it, and we got $700 in rent. So we weren't doing the 1% rule even back then. Which I guess leads me to my next topic, is that, was this a good investment? And I'm curious, like, we can again talk about the numbers. We invested, I don't think we talked about this yet, but we invested a total when we bought the property. You and I pooled money together and had to come up with, I guess your book showed $7,725. That's what we put down on the property, including down payment, closing costs, or whatever. We each had to write a check for, $3,800 to secure this property. And after all this time, it's worth, we owe basically nothing on it. It's worth $225,000. there has been some negative cash flow in there, but overall, it just shows kind of the time value and the value or the value of that you can leverage time to really gain wealth in real estate. So I'm just curious, like, how do you view this investment from where you sit, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned earlier we're gonna give it a grade. I guess before I do that, I think, I look at it two different ways. One, it was an invaluable lesson for us. I mean, it was our first, entry into real estate investing, and it ended up being, more on the conservative side. I mean, we paid fair market value for the house when we bought it, so we didn't like get some amazing deal up front. It was minimally cash flow neutral, probably
Hmm.
initially. Um, and when you consider the pay down, it was negative cash flow. So,
Right.
but we did use other people's money to pay it down. And yeah, now almost, 25 years later, it's virtually paid off. And that's been a neat event for us because we didn't have to come out of pocket anymore for it. The second thing is it gave us, a lot of operational knowledge of how to do this. So I think that's almost invaluable. And so from that standpoint, I really appreciate what it's done for us. I mean, in some ways, early on, we were so naive when we first got into it. We didn't know what to expect. And we pushed the envelope as far as, getting a tenant in there and doing work on the house and getting it rented before we bought it. But, that couldn't happen today, unfortunately. But
Right.
the later experiences, and especially some of the negative things that happened over the last 25 years, really taught us lessons that we use today, probably.
Yeah.
The last thing is, yeah, the appreciation side of it has been amazing. And as you mentioned earlier, the amount of money we put down, the $7,700 we put down, that leveraging effect of real estate that you can do there when you borrow to buy real estate,
Right.
that it's hard to replicate that other places. I mean, I think it's interesting that there are other options, but, especially the stock market over the last 25 years has been extremely strong too, probably better than historical averages. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's been a good financial return for us. It's built wealth. It's not been cash flow property, but it's been a wealth building event for us. So at the end of the day, I'd probably give it a net grade of a C.
Oh, see,
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. I did run numbers quickly before we started here and just put it in Chat GPT. What would $7,700 invested back in 2000 in an S&P 500 index fund, like get super, like, which has been great. The S&P 500 has been an amazing return. It would be worth a little over $80,000 today. And so it's hard to figure in, like our negative cash flow and all that stuff, but we're sitting with an asset that's worth $225,000. So I feel like it was the highest and best use without getting crazy with our money, just without taking super risky chances on businesses or things like that. I think it was a great place to put our money. So yeah, I agree with most of what you said. I think it was, had we not bought this property, it would not have allowed us to make even better purchases, because if we put forensics and did this same exercise on a property we bought a year later, we would see significantly better returns. We would see that we bought it better, that it's worth more, or so that, tripling could have quadrupled or been worth 5 or 6 times. I think we could look at some properties that we could say that's true today. So yeah, I would say I would probably give it a little better, maybe just because of what we learned on it, like how I value that investment. I'd probably give it like a B. But if you just took a third party and said, evaluate this investment that someone made 25 years ago, yeah, I would say it's pretty average. I would say it's probably a C. So, but
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, from an experience standpoint, it's an A, but from a financial
yeah,
standpoint, it's like a C. And then if you compare it to some of our other properties that we made later, which have better financial performance, so that's kind of weighting it towards that. It just wasn't as good as a financial return as we have seen on other properties. But overall,
yeah,
it wasn't bad. I mean, I think, as you mentioned, it's hard to do that anywhere else without taking huge risks.
yeah. All right. Well, Scott, this has been fun. I appreciate you coming on and breaking all this down. It's been a good exercise.
Yeah, it's been a good 25 years. So we'll see what else
It has.
happens. But
Yeah. We hope everyone has picked up some information that will help them in their investing. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another podcast. In the meantime, we encourage you to share this podcast with your investing friends. Leave us a review and don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions. Until next time, thank you so much for listening, and please stay invested in your investment.